Okay, in this unit we are going to be talking about matter and how matter is classified. Matter is anything that occupies space, so it has volume. It also is something that has a mass, and typically they're represented by three phases. You have solids, which are represented in a chemical equation by a little s in parentheses. A liquid is represented by a little l, and then a gas represented by a small g. The general properties of matter, and I know these are a little bit hard to see, so I'll go through each of them. Okay, so we're going to be looking at different properties. So we have compressibility, so this is how much you can squish something. So a solid has no compressibility. So the pencil that you're holding, the chair that you're sitting on, you can't compress that. The molecules are too close together for them to be compressed. A liquid, there is also very little space in between the individual molecules of a liquid. They can slide past each other, but they're very close together, and so it's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to compress a liquid. Whereas a gas, there is very large amounts of space in between each individual molecule, so it has a high compressibility. Rigidity is how rigid something is, how hard it is, how much it holds its shape. A solid has high rigidity, whereas a liquid and a gas do not, so they don't hold their shape the way a solid does. Something that is fluid, fluidity. A solid, there is none. It doesn't flow, whereas a gas and a liquid have high fluidity. Shape, so does it hold its shape? A solid has a definite shape, so all the solid things that you see around you right now will hold their shape. There's nothing forcing them to stay in that shape. It's just a property of a solid. Whereas a liquid and a gas have a not definite shape, so they will take the shape of whatever container that they're in. The volume of something, so a solid has a definite volume. So does a liquid. So their volume is not going to change. And so all the solid things that you see around you, that volume is going to remain the same. Same thing if you have a glass of water in front of you, it's going to stay definite. Whereas a gas, its volume can change. And part of that is due to its high compressibility. So it can be compressed and then it can be decompressed. So make sure that you copy all of these things down into your notes. You'll want to copy this chart or rewrite it however you want to, but you'll want to know all these different properties. Okay, the physical properties of matter. These are characteristics that can be observed or measured without ever changing the sample's composition. And we divide these into two different categories, either an extensive property or an intensive property. An extensive property depends on how much is there, so like the mass. A small child has less mass than an adult. Okay, you're not changing the person, you're not changing the properties, just one has more mass than the other. So an extensive property, the amount of substance that is there, the amount of matter that is there, will change the extensive property. It doesn't change the sample's composition, so it's still the same thing, you just have more of it. An intensive property, on the other hand, is independent of the amount that is there. Okay, so this is something like density, color, melting point, boiling point, texture, conductivity, malleability, and ductility. So what we mean by this is it doesn't matter how much you have, that property is going to stay the same. So if something is blue, no matter if you have a tiny amount of it or an entire swimming pool of it, it's still going to be blue. If something conducts electricity well, it's going to conduct it the same amount if you have a tiny bit of it or if you have a ton of it. So none of these things change no matter how much you have of it. So water boils at the same temperature no matter if you have a tiny thimbleful of water or an ocean full of water. That if it reaches that certain temperature, it's going to boil. So an intensive property, because these things don't change no matter how much you have, it can help us identify unknown substances. So knowing an unknown substance weighs 24 grams tells you nothing, because lots of things can weigh 24 grams. But if you have an unknown substance and you find that it melts at 100 degrees Celsius, this can really help you identify, because you know what substances have a melting point of 100 degrees Celsius. So it has a much better way of helping us identify unknown substances. The chemical properties of matter. So the extensive and intensive were physical properties. A chemical property relates to a substance's ability to undergo a chemical change that will change it to a new substance with completely different properties. A physical substance that we just talked about does not do that. These things don't change what it is. A chemical property tells us about how it will become a new substance. So this is something like alkalinity or acidity. So that's, how basic or acidic it is. Is it corrosive? Does it react with water? Is it flammable? So all these things are chemical reactions that we're going to be studying this year in chemistry. That's going to tell us what a substance begins as and what it can change into and what kind of reactions it will undergo in chemistry. So these are all important things that we have to study as we're looking at reactants and products, and then what kind of change that they're going to go through.